The air was crisp with the scent of roasted coffee and car exhaust as Claire Bennett walked down the wide grey sidewalk of Elm Street, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows behind the glass storefronts. It was just another Tuesday, bookstore to home, maybe with a stop for groceries if she could bear the after-work rush. She had a tote bag over her shoulder, filled with returned paperbacks and a still warm muffin she hadn't finished at lunch. Her steps were slow, careful. Claire had always been a quiet presence in a loud world. She dressed simply, blue jeans, a knit sweater, flats. Her dark brown hair was pulled into a loose bun, and her hazel eyes, though soft, carried a depth that few ever noticed. She wasn't the kind of woman people stared at in passing. That suited her just fine. But on this day, something was off. She sensed it before she understood it. It started with a lingering glance. A man in a suit passing by slowed, staring at her with a puzzled expression. Then a teenage girl pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. Claire frowned and kept walking, unease tightening in her stomach. The crowd thickened around her, but it wasn't just the usual post-office hour shuffle. People were stopping, staring, whispering. "She's here!" someone shouted from across the street. "No way! That's her! That's definitely her!" Another voice chimed in. Claire froze, panic creeping up her spine like cold fingers. She turned to face the voices. Phones were being raised. People were filming her. "I'm sorry," Claire began, but her voice was swallowed by the sudden wave of noise. A woman pushed through the crowd, her voice sharp. "You should be ashamed after everything you did to his family." "I think you've made a mistake," Claire tried again, louder this time. "I'm not who you think I am." But no one listened. They saw what they wanted to see. A resemblance too close, a narrative too convenient. Claire was being mistaken for Marla Hale, a reality star turned influencer whose affair with a married tech mogul had exploded into tabloid chaos just days earlier. The resemblance was there, sure, same slender build, similar colouring, but Claire lacked the glamour, the confidence, the curated edge that Marla oozed in every Instagram post. Not that it mattered now. The verbal attacks intensified. "You ruined a family," someone yelled. "You're disgusting," another screamed. "She's just pretending to be innocent. You're gonna pay for what you did." Then someone threw their iced coffee at her. It hit her chest, splashing cold liquid down her sweater. Claire gasped, stumbling back, but the crowd surged closer. Someone grabbed her wrist, another shoved her shoulder. Fear exploded through her chest. And then, like thunder slicing through a storm, a deep voice cut across the chaos. "Enough." The crowd faltered. A black limousine had rolled to a stop at the curb. The back door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, well-built, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that fit him like second skin. His presence was immediate, almost cinematic. His face was sharply defined, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, intense blue eyes that held no patience for what he was seeing. "Let her go," he said, voice steady and dangerous. People hesitated. The man moved forward without waiting for consent, parting the crowd with his sheer presence. When he reached Claire, he gently took her by the arm, his touch firm but respectful. "It's okay now," he said to her directly. "You're safe." Claire blinked up at him, dazed. "Who are you?" "Someone who's getting you out of here." Without another word, he guided her through the stunned crowd and into the back of his limousine. The moment the door closed, the noise outside was muffled into silence. The driver pulled away, leaving behind confusion, flashing cameras, and a sea of unanswered questions. Inside the car, Claire trembled. Her soaked sweater clung to her skin. Her breathing came in shallow, ragged waves. The man handed her a towel. "Here," he said gently. "Dry off." "Thank you," she whispered, gripping the towel like a lifeline. I don't understand what just happened." "You were mistaken for someone else," he said plainly. "Someone people are very angry with." She looked at him, her voice barely audible. "And you are?" He paused. "Damien Cross." Her breath caught. The name echoed in her mind. Everyone knew that name. Billionaire, real estate tycoon, tech investor, owner of 3 sports franchises. A man with a reputation for being ruthless, brilliant, and completely untouchable. "And you just happened to be nearby?" she asked, suspicious but grateful. He studied her for a moment. "Let's just say I'm very aware of what goes on in this city, and I don't tolerate mob behavior." Claire pressed the towel to her face, trying to hide her shaking. "They thought I was someone I'm not. They wouldn't listen." "You don't have to explain," he said. "I saw enough." Silence settled between them. The leather seats, the soft hum of the engine, the dark-tinted windows, everything felt surreal. A few hours ago, Claire's biggest worry was whether her cat had knocked over her plant again. Now she was riding through the city in the back of a billionaire's car, trying to process an attack by a crowd that believed she was someone else. "You can stay somewhere safe tonight," Damien said. "I have an apartment nearby. I'll have someone get you a change of clothes. We'll call the police, get a report filed. My team will handle the media if needed." Claire blinked. "You don't even know me." "I know injustice when I see it," he said, "and I don't let it slide." Her lips parted to speak, but the words didn't come. She simply nodded. Outside, the city rushed by. Cars, lights, strangers. But inside, something fragile had begun to shift. The moment that should have broken her had instead opened a door. To what, she didn't know yet, but as Damien Cross sat silently beside her, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change forever. And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. Claire had always believed in the ordinary. She found comfort in the rhythm of repetition, the safety of routines. Her life was a soft whisper in a city that screamed. But tonight, she was a passenger in a world that didn't belong to her. The limousine glided to a stop in front of a towering glass building. Elegant and sharp against the night sky, it seemed to hum with wealth. A valet opened the door without a word. Damien stepped out first, offering his hand. Claire hesitated for a moment before accepting it. His palm was warm and steady, so unlike the trembling inside her. They entered through a private side entrance, bypassing the lobby and any curious onlookers. A security guard nodded silently and pressed an elevator button for the top floor. Claire's eyes darted around. The hallways were minimalist and modern, almost too perfect, like everything was designed to hide emotion. "I can't believe this is happening," she murmured as they ascended. "Neither can I," Damien replied softly, then looked at her. "But you're safe now. That's all that matters tonight." The elevator opened directly into his penthouse. Claire stepped out into a breathtaking space, open floor plan, high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a sweeping view of the city skyline. The interior was tasteful, almost cold. Clean lines, art on the walls, a fireplace flickering quietly in the corner, but the space felt strangely empty, like it had been staged, not lived in. "I'll get you a towel and something to change into," Damien said, disappearing down a hallway. Claire walked slowly to the windows, wrapping her arms around herself. Below, the city sparkled like nothing bad ever happened, but the phantom of the crowd still clung to her skin. The shouts, the fear, the humiliation. She didn't hear him return until he handed her a folded pile of clothes and a pair of slippers. "Bathroom's just past the kitchen. There's a robe in there too, if you'd prefer." "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely stronger than a breath. When she came back 20 minutes later, she wore one of his crisp button-down shirts that hung to her knees and a pair of lounge pants rolled up at the ankles. Her hair was damp, and she looked like a woman trying not to fall apart. Damien had poured her a cup of tea and placed it on the low glass coffee table in the living room. He didn't sit on the couch. He gave her space, standing near the fireplace with a glass of whiskey in hand. "I still don't know why you helped me," Claire said, her hands cupped around the tea. "You didn't even know me." "I didn't need to know you to know that what I saw was wrong. But you're Damien Cross. You probably have people to do everything for you. Why personally step in?" He took a sip of his drink before answering, because sometimes doing nothing costs more than acting. And because for the first time in a long time, I saw something that wasn't about profit or contracts or appearances. I saw someone hurting, someone real. Claire looked at him closely for the first time. He was striking, yes, intimidatingly handsome. His dark hair was neatly combed back, his jaw shadowed with stubble, but what caught her most was his expression. There was weight behind his eyes, something guarded, perhaps even lonely. "You don't seem like the type of man who brings strangers to his home," she said. "I'm not," he replied, "but you didn't feel like a stranger." The words were simple, but they made something flutter in her chest. She wasn't ready for that, not tonight. "What happens now?" she asked. "You have options. If you want to report the assault, I have legal teams. If you want to disappear from the press, I have PR professionals who specialize in removing names from headlines. And if you just want to rest for a night and go home quietly, I'll make sure you get there safely." "And which do you think I should do?" she asked, not entirely sure why she cared. "I think you've been through hell today, and you shouldn't have to make that decision tonight." She nodded, grateful for the pause he offered. "I'll stay," she said, surprising herself, "just for tonight. I'm not ready to go home, not after all that." He nodded once, respectfully. "Then the guest room is yours. It's at the end of the hallway, fresh linens, blackout curtains, and complete privacy." As she stood to walk away, she paused. "Damien," he looked up, "I know this might sound ridiculous, but thank you. Not just for rescuing me, but for treating me like a person and not a problem." His expression softened. "You're welcome, Claire." She offered a small, tired smile and disappeared down the hallway. Damien stood there for a long time after she left the room. He wasn't used to this unfiltered honesty, raw emotion. People usually wanted something from him, deals, investments, access. But Claire didn't even want to be in his home. She was just surviving. And somehow he found that more compelling than any woman he'd ever known. He looked out over the city and wondered what line he had just crossed, and whether deep down he wanted to turn back at all. The morning light streamed in, soft and golden, warming the sleek walls of Damien's penthouse. Claire stirred beneath a duvet that smelled faintly of cedar and linen, the silence around her a stark contrast to the chaos of the day before. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then it all rushed back, the crowd, the shouting, the iced coffee, the stranger who wasn't a stranger anymore, Damien Cross. She sat up slowly, her body aching in strange places, but her heart, though bruised, felt steadier than expected. There had been something comforting about last night, about his quiet strength, his refusal to ask invasive questions. She hadn't felt like a victim around him. She'd just felt like herself. After showering and dressing in the fresh clothes left outside her door, soft jeans, a white blouse, and a lightweight cardigan, she followed the smell of coffee into the open-plan kitchen. Damien was already there, dressed casually in dark jeans and a grey sweater, standing at the stove. "I didn't know billionaires cooked breakfast," she said, her voice still scratchy from sleep. He turned with a slight smirk. "Only for very specific guests." Claire laughed softly and took a seat at the island. "So, I'm specific?" "Terribly," he said, plating 2 omelettes. "You confuse me, and that doesn't happen often." She tilted her head, curious. "How so?" "You don't want anything from me. That's rare." Claire stared at her plate for a moment before answering. "Yesterday I wanted to disappear. You gave me space to breathe again. I don't know how to repay that. Don't, he said quickly. Just eat. They shared breakfast in easy silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled with noise. When they were done, Damien leaned back, his eyes scanning her face. Claire, the media's already picking this up, he said. Your photos online. A few people realized you weren't Marla Hale, but that won't stop the damage. I need to know. Do you want to fight this? She exhaled slowly. I don't know. I've never been in the spotlight. I want it to go away. We can make that happen, but it won't be immediate. I figured. She looked out the window, the city still bustling beneath them, uncaring. What about you? Won't this tie you to a scandal you had nothing to do with? I've been tied to worse, he said with a dry chuckle, and maybe I don't mind being tied to this one. Her gaze returned to him, searching. Why? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his coffee and spoke softly. Because for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm doing something that matters, and maybe because I look at you and, I don't know, it reminds me that there's still honesty in the world. Claire blinked, unsure how to respond. He continued, I've built my empire on control, order, predictability. He paused, you're the exact opposite. You were chaos yesterday, but somehow you're the calmest thing in this room. It wasn't a compliment meant to charm, it was truth, and it landed deep. Claire rose slowly and walked to the window. It's strange, she murmured, how someone can feel invisible for so long, and then suddenly be seen by a million people for the wrong reasons. Damien stood beside her. I see you for the right ones. Her breath caught. It would have been easy to fall into him in that moment, to misread kindness for intimacy, but Claire wasn't a woman who jumped into arms because they were open. She needed more than safety. She needed trust. Damien, I appreciate everything you've done. I do, but we're from different planets, and yesterday wasn't real life. I know, he said quietly, but today is, so let's start with that. Over the next few days, Claire remained under his roof, not because she had to, but because the outside world still felt jagged, unwelcoming. Damien respected her space. He brought her updates from his legal and media teams. He asked how she was sleeping, but he didn't pry, and yet they circled each other constantly, late-night talks on the balcony, coffee in the kitchen, little smiles over breakfast. They never touched, but the space between them was thick with unsaid things. Claire discovered that Damien wasn't as cold as the world painted him. He was meticulous, yes, but also thoughtful. He never forgot how she liked her tea. He remembered her favorite book after only one mention. He worked long hours, but never once ignored her presence in his home. And Damien. He found himself drawn to her quiet resilience. She didn't flatter him, didn't try to decode him. She just existed beside him, with sincerity, with gentleness. On the fourth night, as they stood on the balcony watching the rain turn the city into silver streaks, Claire spoke first. I think I'm ready to go home tomorrow. Damien didn't flinch. I thought you might be. Oh, but... She hesitated. I don't want this to end. What is this? He asked, his voice low. Claire turned to face him. This strange connection we've made, the quiet, the honesty. I don't get that with most people. He nodded slowly. Neither do I. There was a pause, heavy with potential. Claire took a breath. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why are you really helping me? Not the first moment, I get that. I mean, why still? He studied her face, then stepped a little closer, his voice quieter than the rain. Because for a long time, I've been surrounded by people who want pieces of me. But you make me feel like a whole person again. Claire's heart thudded. She didn't answer right away, but her hand moved, just slightly, resting gently beside his on the balcony railing. They didn't look at each other, but they didn't need to. Something was growing between them, and it was no longer fragile. It was real. Claire didn't cry when she left Damien's penthouse the next morning. She didn't look back as the elevator doors closed, even though part of her ached to. She returned to her apartment, small, lived in, filled with mismatched furniture and the scent of lavender from an old diffuser near the window. Her cat, Mr. Darcy, meowed indignantly as she walked in. Claire smiled and scooped him into her arms, grounding herself in something familiar. But everything felt different. The city outside her window hadn't changed, but she had. Something had been stirred open inside her, by the chaos, by the kindness, by the man who had stepped out of a limousine and into her life like a scene from a dream, or a storm. She tried to return to her old rhythm, grocery runs, shelving books at the store, quiet dinners alone. But her thoughts drifted too easily, to his voice, his eyes, the unexpected gentleness behind his power. She tried not to check the news, but curiosity was a cruel master. The incident had mostly faded from the headlines, replaced by new scandals, new outrage. But the whispers hadn't stopped entirely. Online forums debated who the mystery woman was. Some speculated she'd staged the whole attack for attention. Others were sure she was Marla Hale's twin. The few that knew her name kept it quiet, either out of kindness or fear of legal reprisal. Then, one afternoon, the whispers became shouts again. Claire was walking home from the bookstore when her phone buzzed repeatedly. Unknown numbers, news alerts. Her chest tightened. When she finally clicked the screen, the headline made her knees wobble. Claire Bennett. From nobody to Damien Cross's new obsession. Beneath the bold text was a paparazzi photo, Damien standing beside her outside his building the night before she left. His hand was at the small of her back, his expression protective. The article didn't stop there. It listed details about her life, where she worked, where she lived, her college, her past jobs, even the name of her ex-boyfriend, pulled from a 6-year-old blog post he had once written. Claire stumbled into a cafe, her breath short. She ordered a tea she wouldn't drink and sat in the back, her hands trembling. How had they found her? She had only spent 4 nights with Damien. 4 nights, and the world had already decided who she was, what she meant to him, and how she fit into the fairy tale narrative they were desperate to sell. She didn't even realize she was crying until someone handed her a napkin. When she got home, she didn't call Damien. But she didn't have to. He called her. Claire. His voice was calm, but his words were urgent. I just saw it. I'm sorry. She swallowed hard. They know everything. They must have dug into public records. You didn't do anything wrong. That doesn't matter now, she whispered. They're turning me into something I'm not. Again. I'm taking care of it. Her voice cracked. This is why I didn't want to stay close to you. This is your world, Damien, and I don't belong in it. He was silent for a beat. Then I'll meet you in yours. What? I'm coming over. No, she said quickly, glancing out the window. They'll see you. I don't care. Well, I do. The line went quiet. Then he said, Claire, you once told me I made you feel safe. Let me keep doing that. She hung up. Not because she was angry, but because if she didn't, she'd say something she wasn't ready to say out loud. That she wanted him here, that she didn't care about the cameras, that the thought of his hand in hers felt like the only thing real in a world full of noise. The next morning, she didn't go to work. She stayed in bed, her phone off, her curtains drawn. Around noon, there was a knock on her door. She didn't answer. Then came another knock, softer, familiar. She opened the door, and Damien stood there, not in a suit, not flanked by guards or assistants, just jeans and a hoodie, just a man. I couldn't stay away, he said. She stepped aside and let him in. They didn't speak for a while. He looked around at her apartment, the bookshelf organized by color, the chipped mug with pens, the blanket folded neatly on the couch. He walked slowly, absorbing it all, as if trying to understand her through her space. "This is more like home than anywhere I've ever lived," he said quietly. Claire watched him, her heart aching. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I don't want to live behind bulletproof glass anymore. I don't want to build my life on reputation. I want to build it on something that makes me feel alive." She bit her lip. "And you think I can give you that?" "I think you already have." Tears welled in her eyes. "But I don't know if I'm strong enough to survive in your world." "Then we'll build a new one." He took her hand, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. They stood there in the middle of her tiny living room, Claire in her faded pajamas, Damien in borrowed normalcy, and nothing about it was perfect, but it was real. And in a world obsessed with illusions, that made all the difference. 2 months had passed since that morning in Claire's apartment. The world had moved on, as it always does. A new celebrity scandal, a fresh political outrage, and Claire Bennett was no longer the center of speculation. The headlines faded. The photographers stopped camping outside her building. The world had chewed up her name and spat it out. But in the quiet left behind, something else had taken root. A relationship not built on fantasy, but on the real and the raw. Claire and Damien didn't rush. They didn't pretend that they weren't wildly different, or that love alone could bridge every gap between their worlds, but they kept showing up. He spent more time on her side of the city, learned how to make tea the way she liked it, helped her fix the wobbly leg on her dining table. She visited his office once and only once to see where he worked. She didn't belong there. She knew that immediately. Too polished, too sharp. Too many eyes watching her like she was a riddle they didn't want solved. Damien noticed. He never asked her to come back. Instead, he brought his world to her, slowly, gently. There were late-night dinners at the cozy bistro around the corner, Sundays spent at the farmer's market, movie nights curled on her couch with popcorn and Mr. Darcy on their laps. There was laughter, real, easy laughter. And there were arguments too, about privacy, about independence, about how much of themselves they could give without losing who they were. But through it all, one thing remained steady. The way Damien looked at her, like she was the first honest thing he'd ever seen. One rainy evening in March, Claire stood at her window watching water streak down the glass. She was holding a letter, official, formal, cold. It was from a major publishing house. They wanted to option her story, a memoir about the mistaken identity, the fallout and the man who'd stepped into the chaos. She hadn't even submitted it herself. One of Damien's friends, well-meaning, had passed along her writing from a private journal she'd shared with him. Claire's chest ached. Damien walked in moments later, shaking rain from his coat, his hair damp. "You okay?" She held up the letter. "They want my story. All of it." He looked at her for a long beat. "And what do you want?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me feels violated, like my truth isn't mine anymore. I'll call them, tell them it's off." But Claire shook her head. "No, I think I want to tell it, but I want to tell it my way. Not the version with glamour and headlines, just the truth. About fear, about being seen, about choosing to love someone even when everything in your life says not to." Damien stepped closer. "Then you'll write it, and I'll protect you every step of the way." She searched his eyes. "You still think you need to protect me?" "No," he said, brushing a damp curl behind her ear. "I think I need to stand with you. There's a difference." Her heart swelled. She didn't need a bodyguard. She didn't need a prince. She needed a partner, and she had one. Months later, Claire's book, mistaken for her, quietly landed on shelves. No launch party, no media blitz, just words on pages, raw and honest. It resonated more than anyone expected, not because it was about a scandal, but because it was about healing, about a woman who had been misidentified, misjudged, and nearly destroyed by the noise of the world, and about the man who had stepped into that storm, not to save her, but to remind her that she didn't need saving, only seeing. One summer night, they stood together on the balcony of Damien's lake house. The air was warm, the sky ink blue and full of stars. Claire leaned against the railing, barefoot, a glass of wine in hand. Damien came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "This is better than a penthouse," she said softly. "Because you're here," he replied. She turned to face him, her eyes shining. "Do you still miss the control, the power, the headlines?" He smiled. "No, I have something better now." "What's that?" "A life I don't need to perform in." She kissed him then, slow, certain, and for the first time there was no fear in her heart. No shadows of the past, only this moment and all the ones that would follow, together.